It was a brisk autumn afternoon when James Harrison, a billionaire known for his charm and business acumen, found himself contemplating a most unusual decision. Having built his fortune from the ground up, James prided himself on always being in control. But in matters of the heart, control was not as easily maintained. He had fallen deeply in love with Emily Thompson, a simple woman from a middle-class family, and despite their differences in status, he knew she was the one. However, Emily's parents had never met James. Emily had always felt reluctant to introduce him, fearing her parents' judgment of his wealth and the world he came from. They were humble, living a modest life in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Emily had often expressed her concern that they would disapprove of James, assuming his wealth would make him arrogant or out of touch with their values. James, despite being the head of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, wanted to win over Emily's parents. He knew that if they didn't approve of him, Emily would always feel torn. So, he came up with a daring plan. He would pretend to be a regular guy, specifically, a pizza delivery man, and meet them under a different identity. He hoped that by disguising himself, he could get to know Emily's parents without the baggage of his wealth looming over the meeting. Emily, at first, was skeptical when James told her his plan. She knew her parents valued honesty and feared that this deception could backfire. But James convinced her that his intentions were good. He wanted to see if they could accept him as just James, not as the billionaire CEO. The day of the meeting arrived. James had arranged everything meticulously. He rented an old, beat-up car, and wore faded jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a cap with the logo of a local pizzeria. He even practiced his lines, rehearsing how he would speak humbly and casually. As he pulled up to Emily's parents' house, nerves surged through him in a way he hadn't felt since his first major business deal. This wasn't just about business or money, this was about love, about family, and about earning the respect of the people who had raised the woman he wanted to spend his life with. James parked the car a few houses down, making sure not to draw attention to himself. He grabbed the pizza box that he had picked up earlier from a local pizzeria, took a deep breath, and walked up to the Thompsons' front door. His heart raced, not because he feared being discovered, but because the stakes were so high. If this went wrong, it could jeopardize his relationship with Emily forever. He knocked on the door, and moments later, it swung open to reveal a kind-looking woman in her late 50s, Emily's mother, Mrs. Thompson. She smiled warmly, not suspecting a thing. "Good evening." "Oh, the pizza's here already," she said with a chuckle. "I didn't even hear Emily say she'd ordered any." James flashed a smile. "Yes, ma'am. Here's your delivery." Mrs. Thompson invited him inside, offering him a small tip and telling him to wait a moment while she called her husband. But before she could leave, Emily appeared, her eyes wide with surprise. She had known about the plan, but seeing James in his delivery outfit was still a shock. She composed herself quickly, giving him a subtle nod. "Hi, James, the delivery guy," she said, trying not to laugh. "Hi, Emily. Your pizza's here," James responded, playing along. Emily's father, Mr. Thompson, soon entered the room. He was a burly man with a stern expression, but he greeted James politely, though somewhat reservedly. After a few minutes of chatting, Mr. Thompson invited James to join them for dinner. It was a strange invitation for a delivery guy, but James wasn't about to turn down the opportunity. At dinner, James learned that Emily's parents were kind but proud people who had worked hard for everything they had. They talked about their jobs, their community, and how they had raised Emily with values that emphasized humility, hard work, and kindness. As they spoke, James couldn't help but admire them more. They were the kind of people who could see through pretenses, and they would value a person for their character, not their bank account. But as the evening went on, something unexpected happened. Mr. Thompson began to ask James more personal questions, delving into his life in a way that made James uncomfortable. It seemed that Emily's father wasn't as easily fooled by James's deliveryman persona as James had hoped. "So, what do you do, aside from delivering pizzas?" Mr. Thompson asked with a glint of suspicion in his eye. James hesitated for a moment before replying, I work odd jobs. You know, whatever I can find. Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. Really? Because you don't quite look like the type who does odd jobs. James's heart skipped a beat. He was being scrutinized, and he hadn't anticipated how sharp Mr. Thompson would be. Just as the conversation was about to take a more uncomfortable turn, Emily's younger brother, Jack, came storming into the room, looking irritated. Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you. Now, Jack said, ignoring James entirely. Emily's parents excused themselves and followed Jack into another room, leaving James and Emily alone. James could feel the tension building, and he turned to Emily. I think your dad suspects something, James whispered. Emily bit her lip. I told you this might happen. My parents are smart, they're not easily fooled. You might have to tell them the truth. But before they could discuss further, they heard raised voices coming from the other room. Jack was shouting at his parents, accusing them of favoring Emily and ignoring his needs. Jack had been struggling financially, and he felt overlooked because of Emily's success and upcoming wedding. The argument grew louder until finally, Mr. Thompson stormed back into the room, his face red with anger. He looked at James with a new intensity. You, he said, pointing at James. You seem like a decent man. Let me ask you something, what would you do if you found out your fiancé's family was falling apart behind the scenes? James was taken aback. He hadn't expected to be dragged into such a personal family matter. He glanced at Emily, who looked mortified. I think family should always stick together, no matter what, James stammered, unsure how to respond. Mr. Thompson seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding. Good answer. But it's not always that simple. Before James could respond, Jack stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Emily's mother looked devastated, and her father seemed deeply troubled. The evening had taken a dark turn, and James realized that there was more to this family than he had anticipated. As the night wore on, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. Mrs. Thompson tried to carry on polite conversation, but the mood had shifted, and everyone could feel it. James, who had come here to impress Emily's parents, now found himself in the middle of a family crisis. After Jack's departure, Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. I'm sorry you had to witness that, he said, glancing at James. Family is complicated. Sometimes no matter how hard you try, you can't hold everything together. James nodded sympathetically, though his mind was racing. He hadn't anticipated that his plan would lead him into the heart of such turmoil. Still, he was determined to make the best of the situation. He cared about Emily deeply, and if her family was going through a rough time, he wanted to be there for her. Over the next few days, James found himself spending more time with Emily's family. He kept up the pretense of being the humble delivery guy, but as he got to know Mr. and Mrs. Thompson better, he realized that their struggles went far beyond Jack's recent outburst. Mr. Thompson had been laid off from his job a few months earlier, and the family had been struggling to make ends meet ever since. They had too much pride to ask for help, even from Emily. Emily had no idea how bad things had gotten for her family. She had been so focused on her life with James and their future together that she hadn't noticed the signs of financial trouble back home. When James told her about what he had learned, she was shocked. I had no idea, Emily said, tears welling up in her eyes. Why didn't they tell me? James put his arm around her, trying to comfort her. They didn't want to burden you. But I think it's time we tell them the truth. Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide. You mean, about who you really are? James nodded. I can help them, Emily. I have the resources to turn things around for them. But I don't want to do it as the pizza delivery guy. I need to be honest with them. Emily hesitated. She knew James was right, but she also knew how proud her parents were. They wouldn't accept charity, even from someone as well-meaning as James. Still, she couldn't stand by and watch her family fall apart. The next evening, James and Emily sat down with her parents. The tension in the room was palpable as James prepared to reveal the truth. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," James began, "there's something I need to tell you. I haven't been completely honest with you. I'm not a pizza delivery guy." Emily's parents exchanged confused glances, and James continued. "My name is James Harrison. I'm the CEO of Harrison Technologies, and I'm also Emily's fiancée." The room fell silent. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson stared at James in shock, and for a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "You're telling me that you've been pretending to be someone else this whole time?" James nodded. "I didn't want you to judge me based on my wealth. I wanted to get to know you without that clouding our relationship." Mr. Thompson looked at James for a long moment, then he stood up and walked to the window. His back was turned, and James couldn't read his expression. "I don't know whether to be angry or impressed," Mr. Thompson finally said. "You lied to us, but I can see why you did it." Mrs. Thompson, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "James, we appreciate your honesty, but we're not the kind of people who can be bought. We raised Emily to value hard work and integrity, and we expect the same from the man she marries." James nodded. "I understand, and I respect that. But I'm not offering charity. I want to help because I care about your family, and because I want to be part of it." Mr. Thompson turned back to face James. "We don't need your money." "It's not about money," James said. "It's about family. I want to help, but only if you're willing to accept it." There was a long pause, and then Mr. Thompson walked over to James and extended his hand. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. If you're serious about wanting to help, then maybe we can talk." James shook his hand, relief washing over him. The deception had been risky, but in the end, it had brought them closer together. Over the next few months, James worked closely with Emily's parents to help them get back on their feet. He didn't just throw money at the problem, he helped Mr. Thompson find a new job, assisted Mrs. Thompson in managing their finances, and even helped Jack get back on track with his life. As James and Emily prepared for their wedding, the Thompsons came to see James not as a wealthy outsider, but as a true member of their family. James had proven himself not through his wealth, but through his character, and that was what mattered most to them. On the day of the wedding, as James stood at the altar waiting for Emily, he couldn't help but smile. The journey to win over her family had been far from easy, but it had been worth it. He had learned that true love and acceptance came not from money or status, but from the bonds that are formed through honesty, loyalty, and a willingness to stand by the people you care about, no matter what. When Emily finally walked down the aisle, her eyes filled with tears of joy, James knew that they were beginning a new chapter not just as a couple, but as a family, one built on trust, love, and the knowledge that they could face anything together. And as for the pizza delivery ruse, well, it had become a family legend, a story they would tell for years to come, always with a smile, knowing that it had been the first step in bringing them all closer than ever before.